He was hailed as a modern-day angel, a voice that moved millions and captivated the judges of one of the world's biggest talent shows. Malachi Bayoh wasn't just another child prodigy. He was the hope of a new generation of classical music lovers. But behind the thunderous applause, the viral performances, and the bright spotlight, a storm was quietly brewing. The boy who once stood effortlessly on stage, delivering soul-stirring arias that left audiences breathless, would soon face a life-altering tragedy, one that no one saw coming. In a twist that shocked fans and devastated the music world, Malachi's journey took a heartbreaking turn. Whispers of a tragic accident began to circulate. Tributes poured in. Vigils were held. The rising star whose voice once soared through opera houses suddenly fell silent. What really happened to Malachi Bayoh? And how did a child so full of promise become the face of a national tragedy and a symbol for something far deeper than fame? This is the untold story behind the rise, the fall, and the legacy of a boy whose voice may have left the stage, but never the hearts of those who heard him. In a moment that would later be described as one of the most unforgettable auditions in the history of Britain's Got Talent, a 13-year-old boy named Malachi Bayoh stepped onto the stage and left an entire nation stunned. Dressed modestly and standing with quiet poise, he gave no hint of the powerful vocal display he was about to unleash. As the first notes of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Pie Jesu floated into the air, something remarkable happened. An audience known for roaring applause fell utterly silent. Malachi's voice, a rare and ethereal treble, carried with it a haunting beauty that seemed to suspend time. The purity and emotional resonance of each note cut through the noise of everyday life, and for a few minutes, all eyes and ears were on this young boy who channeled something divine through music. The judges, typically composed and critical, were visibly shaken. And then, in an instant that would define both the episode and Malachi's early career, Simon Cowell reached for the golden buzzer. The stage erupted into golden confetti, the audience into thunderous applause, and the boy who had walked on as an unknown talent was now catapulted into the national spotlight. But it wasn't just a moment of showbiz spectacle, it was a seismic cultural moment. In a genre often overlooked on mainstream platforms, Malachi's classical performance not only moved hearts but shattered expectations. His audition clip went viral within hours, drawing millions of views and reigniting a global conversation about young talent, classical music, and emotional authenticity. Social media was flooded with reactions ranging from disbelief to admiration, many declaring that Malachi's voice was not just rare, but once in a generation. Classical music forums and educators praised his control, diction, and emotive interpretation, noting that such precision and expressiveness are typically seen in artists twice his age. The audition didn't just earn him a place in the semifinals. It marked the beginning of a new chapter for classical crossover on primetime television and established Malachi Bayoh as more than a contestant. He was a prodigy on the rise, and the world was just beginning to take notice. Following his jaw-dropping audition, Malachi Bayoh didn't just maintain momentum, he soared. As the live semifinal approached, many questioned whether a child singer could deliver under the immense pressure of national scrutiny. Malachi answered not with words, but with a performance that silenced doubt. Taking on Puccini's O mio babbino caro, a notoriously demanding piece even for seasoned sopranos, he displayed a command of breath control, tone, and emotional nuance that belied his age. The aria, drenched in longing and delicate phrasing, was transformed into a showcase of vulnerability and artistic strength. The audience once again fell under his spell, while critics praised his growing mastery of operatic repertoire. He advanced to the final round, where the stakes were even higher, and his next choice would either cement his place in the classical elite or expose the fragility of young stardom. True to form, Malachi chose Lucio Dalla's Caruso, a piece revered for its emotional range and technical difficulty. It was a bold move, and it paid off. The clarity of his high notes, the maturity in his delivery, and the crystalline beauty of the final sustained tone earned a standing ovation, not just in the studio but across living rooms around the world. Though he didn't take home the top prize, the consensus was unanimous. Malachi had outgrown the confines of a talent competition. He wasn't a novelty, nor just a young boy with a big voice. He was an emerging force in classical music, someone who could bridge the gap between generations and genres. Analysts began to discuss his impact on the accessibility of opera and classical vocal performance. Educators reported spikes in interest in choir auditions, while streaming services noted a sharp uptick in plays of classical arias following his televised appearances. Malachi had become more than a contestant. He was a symbol of the resurgence of serious vocal music in popular culture. His performances didn't just entertain, they inspired. They reopened conversations about the place of art, tradition, and youth in modern media. And with his stardom continuing to rise, one thing became clear: this was only the beginning. For most child stars, a moment of fame on a reality show becomes the peak of their journey. But for Malachi Bayoh, Britain's Got Talent was just the beginning. As the confetti settled and the television lights dimmed, Malachi's career began to pivot from primetime spectacle to elite classical performance stages. In November 2022, the then 14-year-old made his operatic debut at none other than the Royal Opera House in London, an achievement that places even seasoned vocalists in rarefied air. He took on the role of Oberto in Handel's Alcina, and those who witnessed the performance spoke of something extraordinary: a stage presence refined far beyond his years, paired with technical precision that left critics scrambling for superlatives. The Daily Telegraph lauded him as a star in the making, while other outlets noted the emotional maturity embedded in his interpretation. The production itself would go on to win a 2023 Olivier Award, and Malachi's contribution was recognized as pivotal. But perhaps the most striking moment from that evening was not on the stage, but in the reaction it provoked, when an audience member, reportedly upset by the casting of a child in such a prestigious role, booed Malachi during curtain call. The backlash was swift. The individual was banned from the Royal Opera House for life, a powerful gesture underscoring not only the institution's belief in Malachi's talent, but also the classical world's willingness to protect its emerging voices. The incident, while painful, cemented Malachi's place in the opera community as both a gifted artist and a trailblazer challenging outdated norms. It sparked debates about age, talent, and inclusion in traditional art spaces. But for Malachi, it was just another step forward. He handled the controversy with quiet grace, choosing instead to let his music speak louder than any critic ever could. As bookings at major venues began to follow and his reputation grew, the transition was complete. Malachi Bayoh was no longer just a contestant on a televised talent show. He was now a recognized figure in the global classical music scene, a rising tenor whose journey had only just begun. While many artists quietly fade after early acclaim, Malachi Bayoh's momentum only accelerated, reaching beyond traditional opera houses and into the realm of global recognition. One of the most striking chapters of his young career unfolded in December 2022, when he collaborated with legendary Welsh singer and classic FM presenter Aled Jones. Together, they recorded a duet of the Christmas classic, "Oh, Holy Night," at the historic St. Paul's Church in Covent Garden. What began as a simple performance quickly became a viral sensation. The video amassed over 25 million views across social media platforms within weeks, with audiences praising not only the stunning vocal harmony but the visible emotional bond between the two performers. Their follow-up recording, "Walking in the Air," further showcased Malachi's dynamic range and storytelling ability through music, earning him recognition beyond the classical music community. Suddenly, people who had never stepped foot inside an opera house were sharing his videos, downloading his tracks, and referring to him as the boy with the voice of an angel. But Malachi wasn't content to stop at viral success. In April 2023, he stepped onto the stage of the Royal Albert Hall during Classic FM Live, performing Mozart and Handel arias alongside the English National Opera Orchestra. His voice echoed through one of the most iconic venues in the world, and once again, he earned a standing ovation. The classical world watched in admiration as Malachi, barely into his teens, held his own among the best. Then came a defining achievement, his debut studio album, Golden, released under Universal Music. It was an instant success, debuting at #1 on the UK Classical Albums chart and topping Billboard's Traditional Classical Albums chart in the United States. This level of international acclaim is rare for any artist, let alone one still attending school. With every milestone, Malachi continued to break down barriers, just as Malachi Bayoh's career appeared to be ascending beyond limits. With accolades piling high and fans across the globe awaiting his next performance, a sudden and devastating turn of events brought everything to a halt. Reports began circulating online of a serious accident involving the young prodigy. Details were sparse, vague, and riddled with speculation, but the undercurrent was clear. Something had gone terribly wrong. For an artist so deeply admired and publicly visible, the abrupt silence from his management and inner circle only intensified public concern. Was it a car accident? A medical emergency? Or something more personal and painful? The speculation spiraled, with fans and followers clinging to fragments of information while hoping for a sign of recovery. As concern mounted, a palpable sense of dread spread through the community. The truth, when it emerged, was no less devastating. While specifics remained tightly guarded to protect his privacy, what became undeniable was that Malachi had suffered a life-altering incident, one that not only left physical and emotional scars, but also cast a shadow over his once unshakable future in music. Rumors swirled about the pressures he faced behind the scenes, the relentless expectations, the mental and emotional toll of performing at elite levels from such a young age, and the possible burnout that many young artists quietly endure. Whispers of anxiety, depression, and emotional withdrawal began surfacing in online forums and among those close to the industry. Yet, amidst the confusion and sorrow, fans began organizing vigils, lighting candles, and sharing clips of Malachi's greatest performances as a way to cope with the uncertainty. It wasn't just grief, it was fear, heartbreak, and a collective sense of helplessness. How could someone who seemed so invincible, so touched by brilliance, be vulnerable to such tragedy? The accident became more than just a turning point in Malachi's life. It became a national conversation about what fame costs, especially for the young. And as the world waited in silence for clarity, one question hung painfully in the air. Would Malachi ever return, not just to the stage, but to the world that so adored him? In the wake of the heartbreaking accident that derailed Malachi Bayoh's promising trajectory, a deeper, more uncomfortable truth began to emerge. One that extended far beyond a single tragedy and forced society to confront a growing crisis among young talents in the spotlight. The incident ignited an urgent national conversation about youth mental health, the silent struggles of prodigies, and the pressure cooker environment often hidden beneath polished performances and social media applause. Malachi's story, once one of joy and awe, now became a symbol of how invisible wounds can thrive behind even the most radiant smiles. While official statements remained guarded, the public began connecting the dots. Intense performance schedules, global expectations, and a life lived under constant scrutiny can have a crushing psychological impact, especially on someone not yet old enough to vote. Mental health advocates, educators, and musicians began speaking out, many admitting that Malachi's tragedy was not an isolated case, but rather a painful reflection of systemic neglect. Schools began implementing emergency mental health workshops. Classical music institutions released joint statements acknowledging the toll fame can take on children in the arts. Social media campaigns trended worldwide, using hashtags like #ProtectYoungArtists and #MentalHealthMatters, calling for more humane treatment and mental health safeguards for youth performers. At candlelight vigils held across the UK, people didn't just mourn, they demanded change. Parents held their children closer. Choir teachers re-evaluated the emotional demands placed on their students. Even streaming platforms curated Malachi's music with quiet tributes and links to mental health resources. What once had been whispers about emotional fatigue and hidden distress among gifted youth were now broadcast headlines. And at the center of it all stood Malachi, not just as a prodigy whose voice captured the heavens, but as a young soul who reminded the world that brilliance and vulnerability often walk hand in hand. His story became a rallying point, a collective wake-up call that mental wellness must be treated with the same seriousness and urgency as physical health, especially in high-achieving youth. And as the grief settled into reflection, a new mantra began to echo among communities, institutions, and fans alike: never again. What began as anxious speculation eventually gave way to the unthinkable. confirmation of Malachi Bayoh's passing sent shockwaves through communities, institutions, and international media. The young prodigy, once hailed as a beacon of purity in classical music, was gone. His death marked a moment of national mourning that transcended musical circles and pierced deep into the cultural psyche. The news, though initially withheld from public announcement out of respect for his family's privacy, could not be held back for long. As tributes began to surface, from fellow musicians, fans, mentors, and even government officials, the world was forced to reckon with the depth of the loss. Vigils turned into memorials. School assemblies were held in his name. Social media feeds were flooded with clips of his most powerful performances, now tinged with a haunting sense of finality. At the Royal Opera House, where his voice had once soared, a black ribbon was draped across the entrance. In London, an impromptu choir gathered to sing Pie Jesu in his memory, the same piece that had catapulted him into the spotlight. Across continents, the classical world fell into a collective silence not out of tradition, but out of respect. But the impact of Malachi's death extended far beyond the artistic community. News outlets dedicated hours of coverage to the tragedy, not just to memorialize his talent, but to explore the deeper implications of youth burnout, emotional isolation, and the immense psychological pressure placed on high-performing children. His story was no longer just a tribute to his achievements. It became a case study for reform. Grief transformed into advocacy. Parents wrote open letters. Youth mental health organizations reported spikes in outreach and requests for counseling. Government representatives began to discuss policies for increased mental health funding in schools and artistic institutions. In every corner of the cultural landscape, one thing became clear. Malachi Bayoh had left more than a musical legacy. He had sparked a movement that demanded visibility for the unseen, care for the overlooked, and remembrance for a voice that, even in silence, continued to change the world. In the aftermath of Malachi Bayoh's untimely passing, grief gave way to action, and what began as mourning evolved into a living legacy, one that now breathes life into the dreams of countless young artists across the globe. Institutions, philanthropists, and everyday citizens came together with a singular goal: to ensure that Malachi's story would not end in silence, but instead echo through future generations. Among the first to take action were arts foundations and music conservatories, many of which established scholarships in his name to support talented youth from underrepresented and low-income backgrounds. The Legacy Foundation for the Arts, for example, launched an annual award aimed at nurturing young talents in classical voice, piano, dance, and musical theater, fields Malachi had once elevated with his presence. These scholarships were not merely honorary. They were fully funded, competitive programs offering access to mentorship from world-class professionals, studio time, mental health support, and performance opportunities in prestigious venues. At Berklee College of Music, the Prince Charles Alexander Scholarship expanded its criteria to prioritize young artists who, like Malachi, demonstrated a commitment to musical excellence and social awareness, especially those working to celebrate the music of the African diaspora. In parallel, charitable initiatives emerged with a more grassroots focus. The Count Basie Center Academy of the Arts launched an outreach program specifically for inner-city youth, pairing them with coaches and counselors who understand the emotional weight of pursuing greatness at a young age. These programs provided not only technical training, but also emotional literacy, helping children manage stress, express fear, and navigate the complex terrain of talent and expectation. Beyond music, Malachi's legacy inspired reform in mental health education. Schools across the UK began piloting peer-led support systems and integrating mental wellness modules into their arts curriculum. Communities that once viewed mental health as taboo were now leading dialogues in churches, mosques, and synagogues hosted seminars in honor of Malachi's story. In each of these efforts, the message was clear. His life had meaning, and his death would not be in vain. Through every note sung by a scholarship recipient, through every young performer who now receives the care they need, and through every conversation that dares to speak openly about pressure and pain, Malachi's spirit endures. He may have left the stage far too soon, but the spotlight he left behind now shines on others, guiding them toward healing, purpose, and a future where artistry and well-being walk hand in hand. Though Malachi Bayoh's life was heartbreakingly brief, His voice continues to echo far beyond the final curtain call. In concert halls and classrooms, on streaming platforms, and at candlelit vigils, his presence